You're watching Inside the Right. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, longtime Republican operative, Tim Miller. So, Tim, you've sat through a lot of State of the Union responses. I know they're not an easy job, but I want to draw your attention to this Republican response by Senator Katie Britt from Alabama.
First of all, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you.
And Tim, I want you to know that I stand with you. How does something like this happen? Like, how does something like this, how does she, who lets her go on air and do that?
I appreciate that, Brian. Thank you for having me. Boy, I don't know, brother.
We're going to hit every single syllable. Every syllable matters here.
Every syllable matters. I got to tell you, it was so bad that about like 5 minutes in, I'm sitting at home on my couch watching it last night. I'm looking at my husband like, this is as bad as I think it is, right? Like, I'm physically uncomfortable watching this. I was a little bit scared. The way that it's shot, I texted one of my friends who does movies. The way that it's shot is kind of like how a horror movie is shot. You know, there's no light in the window behind. The camera's very slowly moving, and it creates a creepy sense. I was worried someone was going to jump in with a knife at some point.
Yeah,
it was hard to like focus on the substance. We can get into the substance, but it was the weirdest speech that I've ever seen. And I've been to several Turning Point USA conferences and many more than several CPACs, so I've seen some weird speeches. And as far as the State of the Union, just to kind of level set myself, before we got on to discuss this, I went back and rewatched. So the two famously bad ones on the Republican side, at least, were both when I was at the Republican National Committee. Bobby Jindal, Louisiana governor at the time, responding to Obama, and then Marco Rubio, senator, responding to Obama. And that one, he famously like grabs the water bottle because he's thirsty. I went and rewatched both of those. Compared to Katie Britt, they were fine. They were kind of gentleman C's. Like, they were a little, it's hard, as you're saying, the State of the Union, it's hard to do because you're the president and you have this sheen of credibility that comes from you're in the chamber and senators and Supreme Court justices are watching you. And then you cut to somebody that's usually in kind of a quiet room. And it's hard to match, right? The tone and the gravitas and the energy. But like, you can just kind of do a single, not to do a baseball, kind of analogy here. Like, you can just give a normal speech and it's fine. Nobody's going to remember. When you try to do what Katie Britt did, which is execute this very dramatic, very staged, choreographed speech in a kitchen. Why is she in a kitchen? I don't know. She's a senator, right? She's like trying to do this mom thing. And so it is just this overt attempt to try to deal with the fact that it is a hard job to do this response, and she just utterly fails in a way, and so spectacularly that it is like far beyond the fail of past failures. And so now I think Katie Britt will have this forever. Every State of the Union address, anytime jokers like us are coming on to talk about it, that will be the bar. They'll be like, well, at least they didn't do the creepy whisper voice in the kitchen.
What was weird, I think, especially, is that I think with the background, they were trying to go for like a regular, normal American house. But then the dichotomy of that with just like an affect that was so not normal, like you didn't have to do much. Like, she was trying so hard to do something that wasn't anything that was like matching her environment. Like, all you do is just, if you're going for the I'm in my kitchen, I'm a regular mom thing, just talk, just like be a normal human being. But there was such like a glaring lack of like authenticity, but also just regular humanity that didn't seem to shine through. And somewhere along the line, they seem to have like lost that. And you have Joe Biden, who is as regular a guy as you can get. I mean, he's up there in a chamber of like mostly millionaires talking about the detrimental impacts of junk fees and bank charges and shrinkflation, where your Snickers bar isn't as big as it used to be, like just regular stuff. And somewhere along the line, it really does seem to have flipped.
Yeah, just talk is really key. And this is what I think why they picked her. That I've heard Katie Britt talk. I have my complaints about Katie Britt, but she's a regular. We're all about the same age. Like, she's a young senator, right? And she can speak like a normal human. This little performance that she did, this kind of like High School Musical audition thing that she did, is not her normal voice, right? And so it landed in this. Are you familiar with the concept, the uncanny valley? It's like when you create an AI that's like that's not quite robot, not quite human, and so it
Yeah.
makes you uncomfortable. She had like kind of that vibe
Yeah.
going for it. It just made it was very like jarring, disorienting to watch. And so I guess I would say this. I could see a theory where you try to do the, hey, we're going to do a response from a family home in a kitchen, and the president's going to speak about this highfalutin stuff, and then I'm going to respond and be like, hey, inflation's up, grocery bills are too high. I know what it's like to do. You could imagine a politician pulling that off, but even still, I just think for a woman, putting a woman saying, okay, the Republicans who already have issues with women, issues with women on policy issues when it comes to bodily autonomy, issues with kind of misogyny, with having the presidential candidate that likes to grab women by the pussy, and admittedly, right, like, do you want to go with the stereotype of, oh, okay, we're gonna make our respondent be a woman, and we're gonna have her be a trad wife sitting in a kitchen? That whole
Yeah.
thing, I don't understand that choice, right? I don't understand how they think that could have really worked out for them. And so like her performance was bad, that they set her up to fail to be in that situation. Like I don't know if you saw the talking points leaked beforehand, before the speech, and like she'd sent some talking points out to some allies, and they're like, after the speech, I want you to send out tweets. It's like, Katie Britt is going to be America's mom. It's like, why are you trying to be America's mom? I just the whole they set her up for failure by creating this goal that was totally wrong.
Yeah.
Just be a senator, just be a woman, be a girl boss, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, be a woman in a fucking power suit that goes out there and just says, hey, Joe Biden's made this mistake, and I think that, I'm concerned about inflation, I'm concerned about the border. That would have been fine. What they did instead was just a catastrophe.
Yeah, I mean, it's this weird continuation of today's Republican Party, like thrusting how they believe a family should be onto everybody else. Like, we don't need your moms. Like, we're all good. Like, we have let us do our own family thing. And that's been
We got a mom.
We got a mom. Like, we got all our moms. Like, that's been a recurring problem here. And so I was going to ask, like, to what extent do you feel like they actually needed to find somebody who fit the bill, especially to assuage concerns about IVF?
Yeah, well, I think the IVF thing came after they chose Katie Britt, and so in some ways that complicated it because it happened in Alabama, where she is senator. But I do think they were intentionally. Look, Republicans are worried about women voters. They're getting crushed with women voters. There's a huge gender gap. But again, then what is the strategy there for having Katie Britt? And I think that what you saw, in my view, is, besides all the weird choreography, was a party that where the more normal on the scale, whatever you want to use them, the more normal candidates and consultants, the folks that I used to work with, they're still a little bit uncomfortable, uneasy. They don't know the right balance, right? Because Donald Trump is so unusual, and like his talking points are so off the deep end. He's just not a normal politician. Like, okay, and the way he talks is so strange. And yet it works for him, right? And so you can see these like more normal people trying to figure out, okay, how do I navigate this, right? Like, how do I appease the MAGA folks that want to have a trad wife in the kitchen, but then also appease, swing voters that are looking for, a strong woman that is not gonna, that's gonna say it's okay, the Republicans aren't coming for your bodily autonomy, right? Like, they're trying to do both of those things at the same time, and I think that you can see
you're ending up in the uncanny valley. You're ending up in the uncanny valley.
Yeah, and DeSantis had this, and not on women's issues, but I do think it was very similar. You saw this some on the presidential campaign, where it's like these guys that, all of the little mini Trumps. You see it. They still are just unsure. The ones who come from more normal traditional backgrounds that are like they're doing like a MAGA cosplay while also trying to say, okay, I'm the normal MAGA, and it's hard. It doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And that's why the MAGA people that are being most successful are the ones that just say F it, like, and go full Vivek, go full Matt Gaetz, right? Like, you see that working a little bit better for them, at least within the Republican Party. But then you start alienating swing voters, so they are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place on this, and you can kind of watch it happening in real time during the Katie Britt speech.
Well, she also noted in her speech that Republicans writ large support IVF, which is ironic considering there's 125 of them, including Mike Johnson, who are signed onto legislation that would do the exact thing that the Alabama law did. So how do they reconcile this position, or do they not? Do they just say one thing, act in a way that's completely antithetical to that, and just hope that nobody knows the difference.
I think the latter, right?
Yeah.
And this is what another thing that Trump has taught them is just no apology, you don't need to be coherent. You can be all things to all people. But again, Trump's good at it. This is the problem, right? Like this is a problem. I hate to compliment Trump, but Trump just his manner of speaking, he's so circular, and the way that he does these phrases and that it's hard to pin him down. He's like Jello a little bit, right? Like there's certain things he has very strong positions on. Obviously, some of them are pretty gross. The mass deportations, not Ukraine, not supporting Ukraine. Right? There are a handful of things, but on a lot of issues, Trump just kind of tries to wave it off. You see how he's trying to deal with abortion. He's not really answering it. We talked about this on another episode. And so he can kind of pull it off, at least a little bit better than some of the other Republican candidates, just because of like his skill as a performer. These guys, it doesn't work, right? Like people don't buy it. Like when you're a traditional politician, people want traditional politician answers from you. Like, are you for IVF? Or are you against it? And it's if you're like, oh, okay, no, actually, we're all for it. Then it's like, well, then why do 100 of you have signed onto a bill that's against it? And it's like, oh, I'm not, no, whatever. That's the liberal media. Okay, like that excuse might work in Alabama, but that's not going to work with the voters that they were trying to reach. These suburban voters that have abandoned the Republicans in droves over the last 8 years.
Yeah, and by the way, for those watching right now, like that's why Tim and I do this series, is to make sure that like there is a hermetically sealed media ecosystem on the right where factual information doesn't get through. So, to that point, for those watching right now, if you want to help build up that ecosystem, please subscribe to The Bulwark. That's the YouTube channel that Tim is on throughout the week. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It is important to make sure that we build up this whole pro-democracy media ecosystem to kind of push back on just the deluge of disinformation that comes from the right. Tim, overall takeaway from Biden's State of the Union performance. I know that there were really high expectations. This is most likely going to be the biggest audience that he'll have between now and the election, barring any potential debate that may or may not happen. But he's coming into this with a big audience and with high expectations, especially amid the onslaught of attacks that he contends with on a daily basis from a Republican Party that likes to claim that he's in the throes of cognitive decline.
Yeah, maybe a convention too, but yeah, I mean, this is a huge audience. He didn't seem like he was in cognitive decline. I watched a lot of conservative media last night after the Katie Britt speech, and they're out there throwing out theories that he's on drugs like that.
I'll take that. I mean,
it goes to show you that it was a good night.
If Sleepy Joe is so awake that they're actually considering that he's on like coke or something, that is a win any day in my book.
They had some complex theories. There was some gal in the Blaze who was talking about how he was coughing into his hand, and so his hand must have had some uppers, some snifters on it. I don't know. They really come up with some weird stuff over there in conservative media world. So, yeah, I mean, so you could tell from their reaction that he beat expectations. I thought the more interesting thing, rather than the vigor, was the degree to which they were intentionally trying to talk to the Nikki Haley voter and to my people, like the former Republican types. I mean, there was a little bit of trying to talk to the left. Of course, they did abortion. They talked about adding the being able to get the aid into Gaza, right, and how they're changing the policies on that. So there was some talking to the left, but man, there was a big focus at the top of the speech. We're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about attacking Putin. I will not bow down to Putin. That was a big subtweet at Trump, right? I will not bow down, Biden says. Then he quotes Reagan, right? Then you get into January 6th and talk about, the defense of democracy. Later in the speech, I think you start talking about NATO, some of these other issues. He mentioned increase in police funding, right? It seemed to me like it was very yeah, exactly. And then the border funding, and mentioning James Langford, and cutting James Langford, who's the conservative Oklahoma senator who's in the crowd, while his colleagues are like booing Joe about saying that, hey, we're going to fund the border more, and saying that's not true. And Langford is mouthing, the TV cameras catch him mouthing, that is true, right? So, boy, I thought that was just extremely intentional last night. I thought it was smart. He's going to have to keep doing it. It's not just a one-off, right? Because I think that there's some folks, obviously like myself and some others, that already made the switch, moved over to Biden, but there's more meat on that bone. You know, there are more people. I know them. We talk to them in the focus groups for the Bulwark. I have some of them in my life who like voted for Trump, and then January 6th happened and they were off the train. And then now it gets further away from January 6th. They start to want to go back to the team they've always been on. And so you got to keep talking to them, keep messaging to them. And I thought that last night was very strong on hitting that audience.
And just to dig into that a little bit, and we'll end with this. What needs to be done to get those folks? Because look, I think it's clear that people on the left need to know, that this, like, the messaging has to be focused to a certain subset of people who are gonna round out this coalition to make sure that we beat Trump. It can't just be like outright progressive messaging on a daily basis. Like, that is the coalition. Right now we have to figure out how to expand it. So what do those people take?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that I was on TV this week with one of these jokers who's a Nikki Haley donor who, God, it's like, trust me, I sympathize with progressives because even I'm like looking at this guy like, come on, just get on board. And, but just listening to him in his own words, what were the issues? NATO, not letting Vladimir Putin run roughshod over Europe. Those are issues. The energy, the fact that we are at record domestic drilling, the fact that he's not going to succumb to some of the left on the police stuff, which he hasn't, but I think that he should keep mentioning that. So, and then democracy, the fact that, he really does support a pluralistic democracy, and that what was the line last night about, you can't only be a patriot when you win, right? And so I think that if that issue set, getting out there and having Biden speak about it himself, but we're going to have to recruit, and this is something that some of my colleagues at the Bulwark are doing, going to have to recruit other people that have credibility with this audience, and so at the convention, he's going to have big Republican names, people that worked for him, people that worked in the administration, the Cassidy Hutchinsons of the world, the John Kellys coming out and saying, hey, this time, this guy, we can trust Biden, we can, Biden it's too risky to go with Trump. I think that kind of combination is what's going to work for Biden, but it has to be surround sound. It has to be consistent. All of these people, they're like, deep in their hearts, they're Republicans. And so, you know what I mean? And so you have to keep reminding them, keep nudging them. And I think it's doable. I think it's gettable. You saw it in these primaries, which we've been talking about. There is a subset of people, but that's why they're swing voters. You're going to have to work them over, and they're going to have some views that are a little bit not great.
Well, look, there is nothing more conservative than actually conserving the democracy that we live in. So,
amen.
Of course, you and I will continue talking about this. Again, for those watching right now, if you want to support this broader pro-democracy coalition that we're building, please subscribe to The Bulwark. Again, the link is on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.